to say that when I left Sandringham this morning, I had to go on the 5:45 train from Sandringham. There was a partly selfish reason for this. I had to get on the phone, have a long phone call with the US, and I had to have documents in front of me. You can't do that in a car. So, but actually I like travelling by public transport. I have in my briefcase all the time the timetables for all of the lines, including the Lilydale line. And what annoyed me this morning was that I got to my table and I saw this little card. I said, I'd rate another free line. But no, it's employ outside the box. I don't know what's on it, but I do encourage all of you to intentionally take this away after this morning and have a good look at it, because I suspect that due to the hard work of, where's Peter Johnston? I saw you earlier. Where's Peter? Tell me this. Come on, stand up. Now, I'm being very, very cruel here, because Peter represents actually a hard-working team, and as you see, Peter's very, very humble. I suspect the team is even more humble. I won't have the ability to get them all to stand up. But I'm going to tell you something, for those of you who have just wandered in this morning, that this morning isn't something that just got dreamt up a month or two ago. You know, let's have get excited about disability, invite a few people, and we'll tick that box and move on. No, this morning is the culmination of months and months and months indeed. I think, Peter, I'm not incorrect in saying probably years of work. And is actually very, very significant. I don't want to be melodramatic this morning, but I would go so far as to say that there's really an element of history about this morning. 7 councils and shires coming together with the support of the Department of Human Services and a range of different organisations that have been variously shown up on the screen this morning. They have actually spent an awful lot of time planning this morning, and this morning is really just the culmination of this broad program with the objective of being serious about opening up our workplaces to people that we so easily describe as having a disability. I've got a bit more to say about that in a moment. But Peter, congratulations to you and your team. It's been terrific sitting next to Kathy Parton from Knox Council this morning. And Kathy, you just mentioned a moment ago that I didn't prompt you on this. You said the passion with which this team has worked. Not just a job, it's not just, what do I have to do today working for the local council? No, Peter's team has shown extraordinary passion in making this morning happen, but most importantly, a much broader program beyond this. How often do you live in challenging times? The national unemployment rate just the other day went up dramatically in 1 month from 6 to 6.4%. Now, there may be a statistical aberration, although the pointy heads in the Department of Stats in Canberra try and alleviate all that. So there's a lot of smoothing involved in that statistical process. But in 1 month, it's gone from 6 to 6.4%. Of course, here in Victoria, the heartland of Australian manufacturing, we had a pretty good ride leading up to the GFC. But since then, we've gone to being, if you like, having a lower than national average unemployment rate to a higher. We're up at 7% and climbing. And indeed, particularly worrying is the fact that some of our large-scale manufacturing, for example, look at what's happening in vehicle assembly, GM, Toyota, those large-scale retrenchments haven't really even started yet. So, we all have a job to do. The last thing we want is to repeat, to go back to an era where we were commonly accepting, 9 or 10% unemployment. Somehow we escaped that over the last few years with the rest of the world experiencing it. But we are on a trend upwards, whereas the rest of the world, or much of it, is actually over the West and on a trend downwards. Of course, it doesn't end there. We've already heard this morning some, I think, quite important statistics that each of us need to be aware of. Whereas many of us regard ourselves as a sympathetic, sophisticated nation, we're advanced. We actually have, of course, relatively high GDP per capita. At the end of the day, as we heard from Mayor Les, we're far too far way down that list of OECD nations as far as just how many people with a disability really have in the workplace. I think many of us think, well, employing such people is not for me. I'm in the private sector. You don't know what it's like have to be so competitive. I pay taxes. I expect my local governments, my state, my federal governments to perhaps employ all of them. Well, one, I don't agree with it, but in any event, even the statistics there are pretty disturbing. Again, the Australian Bureau of Stats tells us that over the last couple of decades, the rate of employment by the public sector of people with a disability has actually halved. So, as I said before, there really is a job to be done here. Now, I know many of you got up early this morning. That's the end of the depressing news. Because actually, I think this morning really ought to be not just a morning of hope, certainly false hope, but I actually want to talk about facts. I want to talk about substance. I want to talk about things that actually matter. You know, the business world isn't always perfect. We think it is, but it isn't. Putting on my CSIRO hat on, the fact is that we underinvest in research and development in this country. It's a fact. My hope is that we will come into an era one day where we invest like other nations do. But today, the private sector underinvests. It's through no shortage of smart people. Gosh, we've invented Wi-Fi, polymer banknotes. 100% of the cotton crop here in Australia is CSIRO varieties. 90% of the US cotton crop is CSIRO varieties. The list goes on and on. We have no shortage of really clever people. And interestingly, if you listen to the chief scientist, Ian Chubb, he says, we've actually got around about the same number of research scientists per head of working population. It's about 8 out of every 1,000 of us who have jobs are actually involved in research and development. And it's the same number as they have in the US, so they're not exactly different in relation to their investment in research and development. But here is the stark difference. In the US, 6 out of those 8 are employed by the private sector, and in here it's the inverse, 2 out of 8. And I sometimes get very unpopular inside CSIRO because I just simply say, that doesn't sound right to me. I love CSIRO, I think it's an extraordinary organisation, it really is. But actually, we need to tweak the dial a bit and to get private sector understanding what it's missing out on by underinvesting in R&D. In many respects, I think it's just due to prejudice, just a certain timidity in business, not knowing what one gets from making that investment. I have to say this morning, in many respects, it's just the same issue. We don't know enough about, if you like, the strengths and weaknesses, the pluses and minuses of broadening the profile of the employee in our businesses. Many of us just say, I don't think it stacks up. Think isn't good enough. And I really commend all of you who have got up this morning in the midst of a busy business life that have made the commitment to come along. I hope it's a good morning for you. There's lots to learn. As was said so eloquently at the beginning, this is not by breath. This is not just a morning to encourage you to do the right thing by society. That's certainly something I'm interested in. But actually this morning I hope is a morning where you can learn something about how to make your business more competitive. You know, we all look for the perfect employee. That's okay, it's no problem, they don't exist. We're in the middle at the moment of a search for the new CSIRO CEO. It's a prestigious position, head of the innovation space in this country. We started out with a list of 150 names and obviously culled it down to a shorter list. The board has been busy interviewing and what have you. And we had our list of criteria that we felt were important. And we have got to the very pointy end of that process now. I'm just in the process of liaising with my minister and the PM's department, lots of stuff, telling them who we're choosing, and it's got to go around the cabinet table a couple of times to make sure they're happy. That's the process. The minister asked me the other night, have you got exactly who you wanted to get? You know, did that person, your preferred candidate, satisfy all the criteria? And I said, no, not really. I think we've got the best person. They will be fantastic. That's why I'm coming to you now, asking you to do your bit. But no, we started with 150 people, and some of these are real names in Australian industry, in the Australian R&D sector, but No, there's no one perfect. No one actually ticked every box. You know, the other morning, on Saturday morning, again, part of a great organisation for this morning, I was able to do just a short interview with Hilary Harper on 774 on Saturday morning, drawing attention this morning, and I was in a really bad mood. As I suspect all residents towards work. We should never have lost to Richmond. 4 games out from the finals, set shots, I mean, they could have even got some of them. It was really, and I got up in the morning, and I had to talk to Hilary, to Peter about this morning, and put on a smile, get you all to come along and what have you. But I just couldn't control myself. I said, Hilary, I've had a really bad mood this morning. Essendon lost last night. But actually, it was an analogy to something I hope quite important, namely, if that had been a work day for me, if that had been a Monday or a Tuesday or a Wednesday, I've got to say, I was so angry. I would have been the sort of guy that would have been leaning on the water cooler, sort of calling anyone over, saying, team hopeless last night. The reality was, it's only a little thing, we can all laugh about it. But I really was annoyed. I wasn't perfect, nowhere near perfect. I was distracted by a game that we should have won. It's actually, Macquarie, the area that I come from, unashamedly tries to recruit these extraordinary, double first class honours, law commerce degree candidates out of university. I'm not embarrassed to say that. They have a particular job to do, and they've often been captains of private APS schools, captains of sporting teams. They've known no failure. I don't review employees anymore. I'm very, very part-time, but there was a time when I'd have to sit down with them after a year or two and say, how's it going? These people that had never known failure. And it was very interesting talking to some of them, because in fact one ended up in tears. And I'm sure this fellow had absolutely never known failure based on his CV at a very young age. But he said, I'm struggling. I was appointed captain of the school, captain of the top 18, the school's footy club. We actually won the premiership that year. I got a great score in VCE. But I'm really struggling working in a group. I don't mind working long hours, I don't mind doing this, travelling at short notice, all that sort of stuff. But I realise that I've got a little bit of an issue here. I'm just, not settling in the group particularly well, personal dynamics, whatever it was. And I was so glad that he was so frank about it. I mean, I think it was evident anyway based on what I was hearing around the office, and it was actually, in many respects, very easy to deal with. But it started with, firstly, his acknowledgement, but most importantly, an attitude on the part of the employer to say, well, that's no problem. Let's just do a few things to deal with that. None of us are perfect, and the sooner we get over it, the better. And as, again, was emphasised before me so well this morning, let's focus not on the disabilities, but on the abilities, on the potential, on the things that we all have, whoever we are. Finding that, when I'm looking for someone for a job, sure, there's a skill base that's important, etc., etc. But I'm particularly interested in their passion, their commitment, their gratitude, their reliability, all sorts of things that too often we take for granted. Above all, of course, their potential, their ability to come into our working place, and as a result of things working out well, we see someone down the track who is actually way, way more than the candidate who came in on the first day. I haven't seen the DVD that's going to follow me, but I understand that it will emphasise a lot of this stuff. I'm looking forward to seeing it. I had this extraordinarily humbling year in 2011. I don't actually talk about it very much, only because it's a bit of an unusual Australian of the year. They're normally celebrities, people like Adam Woods or Ina Buttrose. I was followed by Jeffrey Rush, really well-known people. I was just someone from the world of business that had this wonderful opportunity to not have to work in business all the time and do all sorts of things I wanted to do. But in that extraordinary year, I was asked to obviously give many, many speeches around the country. I gave more than 250 on all sorts of different topics, different causes to different groups. That was the year that the NDIS, National Disability Insurance Scheme, was being debated. And the disability movement obviously used me to talk on quite a number of occasions. I really enjoyed it. It's been an important part of my life, and I wanted to, at that point, impress upon the Productivity Commission, which was doing some important work, to get the right result. That report came out about halfway through 2011, and then all of a sudden the focus was on federal government. Okay, the Productivity Commission has come out and given a big tick. Now it's over to the Gillard government to do its bit. And so there was lots to advocate about. And on a number of occasions I ended up on the same platform as the Senior Australian of the Year, a fellow called McKeon. And time and time again, I don't know why, they got him to speak first and then I would follow. And I was really annoyed about that. You know why? Because as Senior Australian of the Year, he was actually chosen as much as anything because of the extraordinary work he has done with profound disability. He has never seen anything in his life. He's blind. But wait for it. What's his day job? Professor of law. Now, you figure out, how can you be a professor of law, understanding everything from statutes to case law to arguments, what have you, and never have read a word in your life? An extraordinary individual. But the thing that really annoyed me most was that he was a fantastic speaker. He really was. And it dawned upon me halfway through the year that he didn't have one thing, but he'd invested in his other talents, in his other senses, if you like, particularly his oratory skills. And I really felt sometimes during that year that I was kind of like someone wandering out of the outer with the MCG with a couple of cans under their belt. Compared to him, he would command an audience. And at one point I had to say to the organiser, I got smart after a while, I said, look, I want to speak before him, not after him, because I really do know that I don't have skills that he has. One of the big businesses that's been closing down recently, which I'm actually quite sad about, is Alcoa down in Geelong. I don't really have a lot to do with Alcoa, but I do know something, and that is that over the many decades, but particularly the last 30 years that it's been operating, it's actually tried very, very hard to do its bit for employing people with a disability. It's actually won national awards about it. Now, they can't go into the middle of the smelter and do what has to be done there. That is a very, very dangerous place. But Alcoa has done a wonderful job in terms of bringing into the workplace, perhaps grounds maintenance, in the cafeteria, whatever, people who you and I would describe as having a disability. One of the most amazing things that that whole program, as I said, multi-decade program, had was actually not just the giving of hope, the opening up of fabulous opportunities for people that don't have all their faculties, but frankly the extraordinary impact that it had on the so-called able workforce, the guys that were in the smelter. They all congregate together in the local cafeteria. The guy doing the grounds would occasionally bump into someone that was stepping outside of the smelter. And one of the reasons that Alcoa actually received all the tributes that it did over the years for bringing in people with disabilities into that workforce was actually because of the impact it had on so-called able employees. Interestingly, on the subject of facts, and if you're interested in this, please ask the experts that are in the room today, but there are very, very few businesses that start out taking this leap of faith into the world of disability, who after a while say too hard, I'll retreat back to my own safe little corner. Indeed, the statistics show that once you're there, you generally don't leave. And it's not because just that these employers happen to have a soft heart. The surveys are also showing that they're doing it simply for good, strong business reasons. The world of disability not only doesn't mind profit, but it's for profit. It understands that business has to be competitive and focus on profit. It says, bring it on. It's not afraid of it. It just wants a fair hearing to demonstrate what it can do for a business. Of course, also part of the process this morning is to find out what the range of incentives, the assistance that can be provided from government. I'm no expert on that, but there's a whole world of knowledge to be found out there. There are people here this morning that can also elaborate on that. In some respects, it's not a level playing field. It is tilted in favour of people with disabilities. That is good. But it's something that one has to be intentional about finding out about, because there is a body of knowledge. And all I can say is it's worth finding out about. Of course, you won't get something from the government done. I mentioned these factors before, but when we do have the courage to get serious about employing people with disabilities, you get various things. The commitment, gratitude, lower absenteeism, lower turnover, that better feeling throughout the workforce that I mentioned before, say courtesy of the Alcoa example. But at the end of the day, the big P word resonates. It's a challenge for us in Australia. Productivity has been declining actually for many years. We're a bit worried about this, we're not quite sure why it's happening. But the reality is that that's what the focus is on when one has a sensible attitude in opening up our workplaces to people with disability. Now, I've tried to argue the business case this morning. Of course, I don't want to just leave it there. At the end of the day, particularly employers who have control over their business. You're not part of a big combine, a listed public company. But I guess we have to ask ourselves the question too, what's the purpose of life? And surely there's got to be a little bit of room to just do the right thing, to provide that hope, that opportunity, even if you can't really directly translate it to a more competitive business, to a bigger bottom line, to nevertheless to be able to say, I know deep down it's the right thing. I've been asked over the years, why did I end up in disability? There's probably a few reasons for that, but actually probably the most important reason for me is that I've only got one sibling. She's a much older stepsister, actually. She's 12, 13 years older than me, and my earliest memories are of an older sister who I just knew would be different. She was fantastic. She was a good friend, all that sort of stuff, but she was just different. I remember when I was about 3 or 4, this is probably one of my earliest memories, and she sat me on top of her two-wheeler bike. And we had a backyard in Dandenong, and it had quite a slope. And she just launched me off. And I negotiated, and I was sort of leaning forward, my feet didn't even touch the wheels, and I negotiated the first bush, that was pretty good. Went through a tree, took out a little branch, but the hills hoist absolutely, flattened me. My mum ran out and said, "Die, what have you done?" Now, if I told that story without telling her that she had an intellectual disability, you would have said, "Gee, what an awful older sister you had." No, she was just having beans. This was her way of having fun. She kind of didn't quite think through the implications like other people would, and it's good to be able to laugh about it. But, the world of disability is sometimes a bit different. We do need to think just for a minute or two. And certainly, as I flash forward today, she's just turned 70. Life is very different for her. She's been married for many years. She had 2 children. It's been an interesting life. Many ups, many downs. But interestingly, she still talks so fondly of my father, who of course was not her father, her stepfather. And having a pharmacist he was a pharmacist in Dandenong. And the least he could do was to provide employment for her in his pharmacy. And those were the days when we used to print photographic films and things, and Dad had a little section upstairs. There were 4 or 5 women in there that developed, printed all the films that were brought in. And my sister happily worked in this wonderful group, and I can remember those ladies vividly. They were wonderful people. They knew who Diane was, but they worked around her, perhaps limitations, and also recognised her extraordinary strengths of commitment and perseverance and fastidious detail. So perhaps she wasn't in charge of the unit, of course, but the job that she did was absolutely brilliant. And she talks so fondly today, and indeed proudly, of the days that she was employed. She was a vital part of the community It's not easy for someone with a profound intellectual disability like her to feel proud day in, day out. And it's such a delight to see her today to feel like that. I just want to close by perhaps talking about another little story that's close to my heart. Who's heard of the upper seat chairlift? Yeah. Well, for my sins, I'm involved in that. I try and spend as much time as I can in our little place at the Bay, and when the chairlift started to have problems 7 or 8 years ago, I don't know anything about chairlifts, I don't know much about the tourism industry, but I was sad because it had provided that service for 50 years or so. And anyway, but talking to the owner, I don't know what I can do, but if there's any help, just let me know. To cut a long story short, I ended up being connected by him to a small group of people who really knew what they were talking about. These are, lift experts, etc. We came together, and perhaps not much has been achieved in 7 years. We still don't have a new lift there, but right at the moment we're in VCAT, fighting a small group of objectors. And they actually have some grounds for objecting, because what happened is that Parks Victoria said some years ago, we control 17%, almost 20% of Victoria. It's national park, state park, all sorts of other parks that Parks Victoria look after. But they have a strong focus on getting everyone into parks. Not just the able-bodied, not just those that can put a knapsack on their back and camp overnight, but everyone. And they said a very, very small proportion of our parks has to be open, has to be able to be enjoyed by everybody. And they made this big decision with the chairlift. They said, no, we don't want a little open seat chairlift anymore. It was wonderful, but actually we need things that are going to take people in wheelchairs, families with little children, the increasing number of senior citizens that actually will not ride on an open two-seater lift. That was okay. The problem was that it meant that the corridor had to be a little bit wider. We needed bigger top and bottom stations to receive these. They're still not big by global standards, but these gondolas will seat 8 people if you're not too big, and certainly take a wheelchair. And over the last 2 years there's been I won't say a vigorous fight, there's really only a handful of families at the summit who feel concerned about the fact that we're going to be encroaching a bit more on the park. And I understand where their concerns come from, don't get me wrong. But as we're going into VCAT now, we had council approval recently and a very strong council executive officer's statement, 80 pages thoroughly investigating it, but we're going into VCAT. And sometimes I get up in the morning and say, why am I persisting with this? My world is actually Macquarie, AMP, CSIRO. I understand a bit about big business, but I kind of got involved in a small business. It's probably my only exposure to a small business. And this one happens to be arguing vehemently about the importance of disability. Interestingly, the best way to make money at After Seed would be to go back to the old two-seater lift. The cost of the lift would be a quarter of what we have to fight. So actually, I'm sort of arguing against myself all the time. But nevertheless, where are we at today? Well, what I would say is this, that we'll have to wait and see the VCAT decision in a few months' time. That's okay. We've been waiting 6 years for this. The more as we go through the process, another few months won't make any difference. But what I want to say this morning is that we're only going to be true to ourselves if we're fighting hard for the rights of all Victorians to enjoy this. If we're actually true to ourselves and have a commitment to, it's only a small business, it'll only employ at most 15 or 20 people at the height of summer. But some of them are going to have to be people that we slap this label on as having a disability. I know that. It's actually a no-brainer. And I'm really, really looking forward, finally, hopefully, if VCAT says yes, to building that lift and then telling our CEO, okay, so who are we going to employ? And who are those people that we slap that label on that are so necessary in our business? All I know is that one day, if it ever gets going, and yes, on a day like today, it's not a weekend, it's not a day in the middle of January, the people that will be using that lift will be disability groups, senior citizen groups, people that get in buses and are looking for activities. That's the only way this lift will be viable. And the least we can do is to have employees receiving and greeting them at the end, and certainly people that they identify with. Thank you very much.
ever such a few minutes for you to throw a question at Simon if you have anything burning on your mind. Simon, I will start. Oh yes, don't go anywhere, sir. Yeah. Did you notice that he's still working through some unresolved grief over that Essendon result? You just lingered on that for so long.
It's West Coast this week.
Oh, well, that's that. So, something that comes up again when discussing disability employment is it's one thing to have carrots, that's one thing to have incentives for business, but do we need quoted, do we need reporting? I'm sorry to even bring that up, business owners, but we do. Report on a lot of other statistics, but not the percentage of our workplace that is with disability.
Yeah, it's great. That's a great question.
Thank you very much. That's all we've got time for.
It comes up all over the place. For example, the important issue of diversifying boards, the number of females in boards, and I think out of frustration, many people have said, "Oh, for goodness' sake, let's just have a quota and get on with it." I have no issue with encouraging, say, diversity in boards, but I have a real problem with having some sort of low, put it this way, if it goes that way, we're going to have a number that actually will have to get through some process, whether it's legislative or local council signing off or Becky, someone will have to agree to it. And I've seen enough of these processes that actually the number is just simply set too low. And worse than that, business ticks a box. I'm pretty good, I hit the number. No. My response to that is, if we're forced to do it, okay, I understand it. But my hope would be that actually we would be more sensible about that. We'd have more occasions like this to talk about why it works anyway. The importance of, as I keep saying, opening up our workplaces to all sorts of people that traditionally we wouldn't have considered appropriate because of the logic of employing them. Ultimately, and it's the same with diversity on boards, that's the way it's going to work. To actually point out that a diverse board basically adds more value than a whole bunch of people that look exactly like me. Like, it's a no-brainer. And it's the same in the workforce. Listen carefully to the arguments that are presented this morning. Have an open mind. Question it. But don't run away thinking, they were trying to trick me into doing something that's good. No. This is not that issue at all. And I know, for example, that this DVD that I mentioned briefly before, we're going to get a case study from someone, admittedly not in this country, but a profoundly convincing case study, I think, of someone overseas who just simply wouldn't go anywhere else.